I met y'all yesterday. My name is Brandon Formby. I'm the night news editor for the Texas Tribune. And this morning we're going to be talking about how an idea becomes a bill. And we have a pretty good panel. We are missing one of our panelists, Jerry Patterson, the former land commissioner. We are hopeful that he will join us after we begin. But to my left, we have Rachel Malone, who's the Texas director for Gun Owners of America. And to her left, we have Jason Sabo, founder and lobbyist for Frontera Strategies. And I think to go ahead and just get started, if each of y'all want to just kind of talk about your background and kind of how y'all got involved, like what prompted you to, get involved and build careers, based off of policy and, legislative maneuvering.
Sure. Absolutely. So I was a music teacher. Actually, to back up before then, I grew up in a very unusual background. Actually grew up in a cult where I was completely shut off from anything cultural. Came out of that and became a private music teacher. I was a classical musician. Never dreamed of anything in the political world. Never dreamed of anything in the firearms world. Was just cut off from that. And what inspired, I'll give you two incidents that actually inspired me to get involved. And there was one incident where my brother told me that he was going to get his license to carry. And I completely flipped out because I couldn't imagine how dangerous that would be, and told him he could never have this around me, and this is going to be a horrible idea. And he just said, okay, can you prove the facts on that? And actually, the facts that I heard from him completely changed my viewpoint, and I was still terrified of the concept of carrying a gun because, oh my gosh, how dangerous it's going to go off. But then studying it and realizing the facts on the issue actually changed my mind to where I realized factually, logically, rationally, I am safer with this. This keeps me safer. It is a tool for safety. And so my viewpoint on that shifted. But I still was never going to be a political person. I was like, you know what? Leave that to the people. That's their job. They're the political junkies. I'm not. And what changed my mind actually had nothing to do at all with gun rights or gun control. I didn't care about those at the time. It was literally just, I want to be able to I want to be able to wear the clothes that I want to wear without having to go to jail if my shirt gets misadjusted, or I don't want to have to wear baggy clothes. And so I was actually in support of the open carry law just because I didn't want to go to jail I wanted to be able to wear the clothes I wanted to wear. And so I got involved on a dare, and look where I am now. I actually got pulled into politics just from a grassroots level because I cared about that issue. Started tracking it, got upset the fact that all the people I thought were supposed to do this thing weren't doing it. And it was really caring about it and wanting change to happen that inspired me to then study the legislative process. And then I became a total political nerd as far as the process goes, and became involved in that and many other avenues. So that's my story.
Awesome.
So, Jason Sabo, I live here in Austin, have for about 20 years, have a little consulting lobby firm called Frontera Strategy. We only work for nonprofit organizations. We do some gun safety stuff in the past, work a lot this session on mental health issues, mostly on issues focused specifically on kids. I got involved in this because in 1996, I struck up a conversation with a really cute girl I met on a bus in Brazil, who was a graduate student from UT Austin, had never been to Texas before. I grew up on a farm in Indiana, and having the good sense that I did at the time, chased her back to Austin and managed to convince her to marry me, and amazingly, we're still married, and got involved here really working particularly with immigrant families, and began to work direct service immigrant work, mostly with folks who were new immigrants from Central America. This was the late 90s. And increasingly saw that I was, working my ass off 60 hours a week and was only able to impact this small subset of families, and decided that if I were actually going to be dedicating my life to the pursuit of improving the quality of lives for the least fortunate among us, I should do it where I could achieve the biggest impact per hour, which is why, like many of you, I've decided to work in the general vicinity of this building. So thank you for being here, and I hope we can convince you that you as individuals really can get an extraordinary amount done on the things that you personally are passionate about, even if you don't necessarily agree with the opinions that any of us express.
And Mr. Patterson, did you just kind of want to introduce yourself and kind of tell everyone how you got involved in policy and politics?
Well, first of all, I'm Jerry Patterson. I agree with Rachel. Are there any questions? No, I'm a former elected official. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for 24 years. I was always interested in public policy and politics, even when I was at Texas A&M. Was kind of a political activist, unpredictable, I might add, on which side I would fall. Went in the Marine Corps, came back to Texas, and ran for office unsuccessfully. Again, ran for office again unsuccessfully. And then the third time I was elected with 48.5% of the vote in a three-way race, and served in the Texas Senate for 6 years. Most notable, I think, is, or what I'm most known for, is I was the author of Texas Concealed Handgun Law. And I'd like to get a quick show of hands of those of you who have been involved in a shootout at a four-way stop since we passed that bill. My point is that was what was predicted: blood in the streets, wild, wild west, shootouts at every four-way stop. And what actually happened was firearms homicides in Texas declined from about 7.5 per 100,000 to about 4.5 per 100,000 20 years after the bill passed. Now, that's not because of the passage of the bill, but it's in spite of the doomsday predictions that citizens cannot accept responsibility for their self-protection. I served as Texas Land Commissioner for 12 years, another statewide elected office. Was notable in things having to do with the environment, with making money, the veterans programs that are administered by the Texas Veterans Land Board. And now I am retired and enjoying it, but still have a pull for public policy, a variety of things. I'm not particularly happy with the way things are going in the country today. And I think we are probably more divided than at any time since 1861, which was a fairly significant division if you know much about history. So look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Why do you think that is? That we're more divided now?
Well, because the parties have become a shadow of what they used to be. Both of them are extreme in my view. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Interesting dynamic. Those of us who grew up in Texas, and I did, grew up as Democrats. We were all Democrats in Texas. We had factions, you know, the labor side and the conservative business side. But in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there began to be a flight from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party for those that thought the Democrat Party had gone too far to the left. Today, there is a similar sentiment, I think, among Republicans that think the Republican Party may have gone too far to the right. But the difference today from 30 years ago is there's no place to go, because the Democrat Party is so far to the left. If you're a Republican that's disgusted with Republicans sometimes, you got no place to go. So we are extremely polarized. And I think it's a dynamic that's occurred, probably driven by the fact that election outcomes are now decided in the primary instead of the general election.
I'm going to start with you, and then we can work our way back around this way, because you kind of have a different perspective on this, having been a former senator. Once somebody decides, once they have an idea for a law or for a bill, an idea that's worth taking on, what do you do with that? What happens next? Like, how do you get that from an idea to actual legislation?
Well, the first thing, there probably are no new ideas. Everything has been attempted before and either failed or succeeded. So the first thing you do if you've got an idea is see what happened to those who had that same idea before, ran with it, and see why they failed. The legislative process in Texas was essentially designed in 1875 when we drafted the 1876 Constitution, and it's intended to kill bills. There's a great suspicion of government in Texas. There's an aversion to a powerful executive. Our governor is not all that powerful except for appointments and the veto. So there's an aversion to government. Bills die, and you need to go back and see why they died. What was the opposition? Who were the proponents? Who were the opponents? And start out by talking to them and say, okay, what's your take on doing this again? And you also have to find out if you got any support. I mean, if you're on a Don Quixote endeavor to pass something that, you know, has failed by never even gotten a committee hearing in the past, there's obviously some opposition in the state of Texas for whatever it is you support. But finding out the history of the issue and any legislation is the first step I would take.
Well, as the Don Quixote of the Texas lobby, I would have to say that I completely agree with what the commissioner is saying in terms of the fact that I've been doing this for 20 years, and it is amazing how the same issues that we were talking about 20 years ago do get recycled. But that doesn't mean that if something failed in the past, to his point, that you don't relentlessly continue to push. One of the things that I've worked on a lot over the years is access to high quality pre-kindergarten. We've done things like expand pre-K access to military kids, to foster care kids, last session to additional kids. But we haven't ever really taken the big leap to expand the program, expand its quality with the multi-billions of dollars that would actually be required to do it. When I started out, pre-K was tantamount to rank socialism. It was the plan to indoctrinate our children so that they will become, great little Maoists. Now, we all agree, driven by the business community primarily, that the single best investment we can make on our children is by doing it early. So those issues that today seem unpalatable, politics change. And if you're set in the mindset that your idea is never going to move, you're right. Your idea is never going to move. But if you're relentless and persistent, you really can move the needle.
Totally agree. I'll go ahead and go with this one. We're good. Absolutely agree with the background. Got a couple more points I wanted to add. So I think I would say, acknowledging this is a gross generalization, the bills that tend to pass are things that either one person wants or everybody wants, or everybody cares about. So if basically nobody cares about the issue, but maybe one person really, really does, maybe one legislator had one constituent who really, really, really cares, he can pretty easily pass that and nobody cares if it goes through, so it can just go through without opposition. And then if there's something that people kind of on both sides, they're excited about, but people kind of don't want it, then there's not enough excitement a lot of times to move it through. But if you have an issue that people are very, very excited and they care very much about, even if there's a lot of opposition, a lot of times those are the bills that may move through if there is enough excitement. So gross generalization, but that's my experience and what I've seen. So how does a bill actually practically move through? The thing that y'all know, but you might not realize a lot of the general public doesn't, is only a legislator can actually file a bill. I'm shocked at how many people think that they can actually go and bring their bill up and file it. They can't. You absolutely have to have a legislator to work with. That bill here in Texas, you work with the legislative office and they submit the bill idea to what's called legislative counsel. It's attorneys who work for the legislators who draft the bill in the appropriate language. And you can give it to them as, you can get your own attorneys to draft it and say, hey, please approve this. You can give it to, literally as a bullet point of ideas, say, hey, I want this thing to happen in law. Can you find the right wording for it? So there are a lot of ways to transfer that language. But you have to have your idea in some written format, work through the legislative office, get the Leg Council to draft your bill, and then either that office or another office can file the bill. So that's the actual process. Now, who does that? Well, I think you have two, again, gross generalization, but two basic categories. You're going to have just ideas from constituents, from grassroots, from individuals, and they're going to have ideas from organizations. And a lot of organizations, corporate, nonprofit, whoever, will have lobbyists or public policy advocates who work for them who are the ones whose job is to drive this, and they go through that process and do the communications. Other times you'll have people who are just a constituent. I'm working actually associated with several bills this year who were literally just some random person had the idea and they took it to a legislator, maybe their own or somebody else they knew was sympathetic, and those bills have actually been filed. So the beauty about the legislative process is that absolutely can happen. An individual can have an idea, and if they understand the process, can move it through. And I think I have the unique position of being a registered lobbyist, but I work for a very grassroots-driven organization. I come from that very grassroots background, so I kind of see both sides of it. And it's a beautiful thing to see that if you understand the process, you're able to get so much accomplished and work within the system. And even with the corruption that we all hear about and talk about and the nastiness of politics, it is still possible for one individual to have a great idea, talk about it, and move it through and see that to fruition.
As somebody who's not a lawmaker, how do you follow bills either that you're advocating for or that you're just interested in? How easy is it to kind of follow that through the process and learn the process? And who are the people that you rely on to help you with that, or the tools that you use? 3
letters, TLO. Am I right? Texas Legislature Online. You got to know how to use the website. You have to know how to use our tools. Here in Texas, Unlike some states who I have friends in and they say it's impossible to get this information, we have all the information of things that have actually happened and been scheduled and filed on Texas Legislature Online. It is a valuable resource, and that's one that I think, as you're working with people who are not working this every day as for a living, but you're helping represent them, helping coordinate with them, you want them to understand that too, so they realize how accessible the legislative process is to them. In addition to that, the people you work with, you got to be in touch with the legislative offices, with the other stakeholders in the issue. Sometimes, I know coming into this as somebody who's a musician, I'm like, oh, I don't really belong here. Like, what am I doing here? Years ago, in 2012, 2013 session, when I first started doing this, it was kind of scary, and I just learned it's the social life lesson. You just pick up the phone and call. You just call the office and say, hey, I saw this bill filed. I'm not really sure I like it. Can we talk about this, though? You pick up the phone, you have the conversation, you talk through it, and you get your information. You work together.
One thing that I would add to that is, and really ways, if you think about it, there are really multiple conversations that are happening simultaneously. There's the conversation that's designed for public consumption. And then there's the conversation that happens in buildings like the one we're sitting in, which, just so you know, is the epicenter of lobby money in Texas. Literally the building you're sitting in, and the buildings surrounding it and the places surrounding it within about a 1-block radius. We think that laws are written at the Capitol. They're not. They're written here, and they're written in offices very much like this one. That's the way things function. If you really understand all 90% of the bills that move through the legislature, it has to deal with one thing: money, money, money. Money, the lubricant of our democracy. And when we're thinking about how normal folks can actually understand what's going on, you have to really recognize that there is this public conversation that's happening, and then there is an entirely different other set of conversations that are happening, which in many ways are the real conversations about how the bills are actually moving through the system. And it can be, even as a sort of insider, very, very difficult to figure that out, especially when we have a legislative session that is compressed into 140 days every other year. We're about 58 days from the end of session right now, and the legislature really does begin in earnest in most legislative sessions in mid-March. So this is really the next 6 weeks is the crunch time of the session, so you're here at the right moment. But just understand what you're seeing and what you're reading on TV and even in things like the Tribune is being fed to you by people who want that information to be fed to you in a specific way.
Why are there two different conversations going on, or one for public consumption and then one that's kind of behind closed doors?
Because that's the behind closed doors conversations are the ones that actually guide our lives. They're the ones where the big zeros get discussed. The things like the social hot button issues are the things we like to talk about, but often they're the distractions from what's really happening behind the scenes, which is we think about, for example, the state budget. We had a huge debate this week that consumed 14, 15 hours of the State House's time while we're talking about 308 odd amendments to the House budget. House budget's big, it's important, it's billions of dollars, but it is pennies on the dollar compared to the actual commerce of the state that the legislature regulates. So when we talk about things like the state budget, put it in context with the larger economy, which is guided by, steered by, crafted by, created by the building up the street.
And if I could add, the reason you have those two conversations, it's driven by the money and the deals, honestly, because let's be honest, that's the way conversations work. Hey, I need your vote on this. Well, okay, I'll give that to you, but I need your vote on this. So those are the deals being made, but they're not going to go out and say, hey, we're giving this to Dallas Morning News. They're going to write a story about how so-and-so traded this bill for that bill. I mean, yeah, that gets out, but a lot of times they have to message it in terms of the public message. We're promoting this policy, but we can't tell you how we dealt with it, how we made that deal. So if you would agree, that's a lot of how that happens in the back rooms.
Mr. Patterson, you said that the system's kind of designed, to make it hard to get bills through. Your first term as a lawmaker, what were some of the surprises that you ran into and the challenges that you ran into, and how long did it take to kind of learn the system and learn the process?
Well, I'm not sure I learned it all that well in the first session, but the first big surprise I had is that there were people up here who disagreed with me, and they had a vote as well. It's like, what? You know, how can this be? You know, it's a transition from being a candidate to being an office holder is pretty dramatic and pretty shocking, because you just have, everything is simple when you're running for office. Everything is black and white. Everything is easily understood, and you look at what's going on, you go, how in the hell could these dumbasses be doing that? And you get up here and you realize there are differing viewpoints. You know, things are dramatically, I'm kind of drifting away here, but going back to the how do you keep up, I just have to tell you, when I got here, if you were a constituent and wanted to read a bill or you would call your legislator and say, can you send me a copy? You would actually get your legislator to print it out, put it in the mail, and send it to you. And it's dramatically better now. I mean, you can track when the hearing is scheduled, who testified for, who testified against, any amendments, and all. It's dramatically better for folks today than it was then. But the big surprise is that you get up here and all the things you thought were true when you were running for office turned out to be at least questionable, if not untrue.
Brandon, can I say one thing to
Yeah,
piggyback on that I think that Texans need to know? I work in a lot of other states too, and other legislatures do not have the kind of transparent process that we do in Texas. You might not like what the legislature does. You might not you might not always agree with what our legislature does. But in Oklahoma, you just can't walk into a committee hearing room and sit down and start mouthing off for 3 minutes. In Texas, pretty much you can. And it's broadcast on the internet for the world to see. And I think that that's something that we as a state should recognize and be proud of. We really do make the process pretty transparent, the public side of it at least.
When it comes to constitutional carry, which is part of the Republican Party platform, how has trying to get that through, and then also mental health, and trying to get more funding for mental health for kids, how have navigating those issues through the legislature changed this session compared to previous sessions, just given the recent mass shootings in Texas?
Yeah, so I think the attacks that we've seen here have actually opened the door for some conversations that really need to be had. So for the foundation, what is constitutional carry? It's actually not what a lot of people think it is. What it means is simply, if you own it, you can carry it. Just like you own your car, you can drive around the streets with it. You own your clothes, you can walk around with them. You own a book, you can walk around with it. Yeah, please. Yeah, we're gonna stick with the clothes. And currently Texas says if you own a long gun, rifle or shotgun, you can walk around with it as long as you're not in a prohibited place, as long as you're not using it in a manner calculated to cause alarm. So you're doing it peacefully, right? Same as anything else. You walk around with, have a hammer, or have whatever else. So handgun law does not conform to that same standard, and so constitutional carry means if you own it, you can carry it. You're not breaking any other law. You're not prohibited from possessing it. You're not a criminal. You're not engaged in criminal activity. That's what constitutional carry is. 17 states now have it. 31 states have it, at least for open carry only, but not necessarily for concealed. So that's what we're talking about. So I think a couple of things that drive the conversation, after the attacks that we've seen, people are more willing to realize how vulnerable we are. That evil will exist in the world. The government solutions will never completely eradicate evil. We want to feel safe, we want to be safe, right? And I think we can't conflate the two, that feeling safe, we are safe. Okay, those are two different things. And I think this has opened the door for the understanding that we felt safe, we thought we were safe, now we realize we aren't. Let's address this. And I think that's where we can agree. We want to be safe, we want to have safety, and I think that's opened the door for us to look at some of the numbers and things that are happening in other states and realize some of the safer states and the states where home invasions have gone completely down and crime has either stayed the same or gone down. Violent crime are the states with constitutional carry, and so it's opened the door for those conversations to say, okay, let's acknowledge evil exists. Let's look rationally at some of the solutions that government can or can't provide, and let's make sure that citizens are not being penalized for doing something that doesn't cause harm, but we're penalizing the correct thing. The assault, the attacks. Using anything for violence is to hurt others is wrong. That will be punished. That is absolutely a role of government. and penalizing people for something that's not that, that's simply a desire to protect themselves and defend themselves should not be criminalized.
So, I mean, what would you, how much have the recent shootings changed the conversation at the legislature? Like, do you think that, like, it's changed it a lot or kind of pushed it more in a direction of the legislature is more adamant about not having gun control and focusing on other areas?
I think there are so many factors, honestly, that have driven it, including the fact that in 2013 there were 4 states with constitutional carry and nobody knew what it was. Like literally nobody in Texas, I thought, besides me, knew what it was. There were actually like a half a dozen, which was great. Now everybody in the ledge pretty much has the concept of what it is. So there's so many factors that have driven the conversation. I think it's hard to isolate that one. I mean, there's correlations and equal causation, and we've got that going on here. I don't think that there is a greater resistance necessarily from that. It's not correlated in that way that I see. But it opens the door for the conversation.
This session, the constitutional carry bill, anybody know the bill number? House Bill 357, like the gun, right? Cute. Anybody know the House Bill 357 from the 2017 legislative session? Anybody know what that was? It was a bill that made the children of firefighters, police officers, corrections officers, and EMTs who were killed in the line of duty eligible for pre-K. The same people, there were 11 no votes on the 357 in 17. The no votes on that 357 are the people who are sponsoring the 357 bill in 2019. Remember, this is part of the Republican platform, but so is a rejection of CDC recommended vaccinations. So because the Republican Party platform says something, doesn't mean that the Republican Party as a whole agrees with that position. This is one of those issues, I believe, constitutional carry. If you look at the politics of it, you look at the authors of the bills that are being filed, if you look at the powers that be and the push behind those bills being filed, you really have to wonder, ultimately, if there is a really, there's the possibility of constitutional carry passing this year, or permitless carry, licenseless carry, is about 0. Last session, it was about 0. The reality that we're looking at is this is great clickbait. This is a great way to fundraise. This is one of those issues that people love. But interestingly, when you look at who makes money off of gun bills, to get a concealed handgun license, to have to carry concealed carry, campus carry, all of it in Texas, you have to have a CHL, right? Does CHLs cost money to get? Yes. Who do you pay? You pay the state for the license, right? And you have to pay the private enterprise that gives you the training. Don't forget, gun bills are vendor bills. This is always about money.
Yeah, I think I would disagree with that. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when we first passed the CHL, the fee was $140 for 4 years. The period has been increased to 5 years. It's now $40. Is that correct? So it's really not a moneymaker for the state. The state, we actually legislated that it be a break-even endeavor for the Department of Public Safety. So it's not a moneymaker. I guess there are folks, individuals who are instructors who make money off of it, but it's really not driven by money. One of the things in your original question had to do was how have the mass shootings affected the conversation. What I think they've done, they haven't changed anybody's mind. They have resulted in hardening the positions of those on both sides of the issue. They've become more vehement in their opposition to firearms or in their advocacy for firearms. So I don't know that there's the money motive. You have money motives, and I think you pointed out very well about the 2 locations where bills are discussed and debated, the one in the Dome Stadium to the north or the one in this building right here. And I think that's particularly true of issues that are money related, business issues, the stuff that most voters really don't care that much about. But when you get into social issues, the debate is generally not among the folks in this building who are the funders of campaigns and other buildings, as you pointed out. You get into social issues, whether it's guns, abortion, whatever, it's not a money issue. If it's any kind of issue, it's a vote issue. For example, the NRA's strength is not that they give lots of money to candidates. They generally don't, has been my experience. But the NRA's strength is they bring a lot of voters to the table. Some of them are single issue voters. And it's not as simple as just money in my view.
I'll start with you, Mr. Patterson, and we can go back this way again. Are there examples of bills that start out one way, and as you go through the process, you have committees who can have committee substitutes, and they have to kind of negotiate to get it out to the floor, and then that's where amendments happen. Are there examples of bills that you've had or supported that start out one way, and by the time they get to the governor, just end up totally different than how they started? And where are the areas where those changes happen?
I've never heard of that before.
Pardon?
Kidding.
Oh, okay.
Never heard of
Well,
those
yeah.
changes.
I mean, there are bills that change so much that the author can no longer support them. I mean, they'll pull their name off the bill. And there was some legislation. It was a constitutional amendment that took me 3 sessions to pass, but ultimately did pass it. Notwithstanding the Republican Party platform opposed it. And by the way, you make a really good point that the platforms of both parties are becoming more and more disregarded by the elected officials of those parties because they're just getting out there in la-la land. There's no other way to describe it. But the bill that, I carried a constitutional amendment to allow home equity lending in Texas. Texas was the only state in the union that did not allow you to use your home as collateral for a loan other than a home improvement loan. In other words, it was good public policy to use your home as collateral for a patio hot tub loan, but it wasn't good public policy for you to use your home equity as collateral for a loan to send your kids to college. That to me was just bullshit, and it was basically saying Texans are uniquely stupid and unable to manage their money. The Republican Party platform opposed it. I could care less, and I didn't even get a committee hearing in the first session. I got a committee hearing, and I forgot how far it got the second session, but in the third session, I got it passed. But in order to do so, the bill changed dramatically with so-called safeguards that made it essentially unusable as a net product. But it was a constitutional amendment, and therefore it passed the legislature, takes 2/3 of both houses, the governor doesn't have to sign it, and then it goes to the voters for a referendum in the next November election. In that November election, it passed 2-1. So all of a sudden, the legislature, we thought everybody's opposed to this. Well, hell, maybe they're not. So the next session, we came back and we made it better. So sometimes the way to get what you want is to accept something. You love the one you're with, kind of that song from a long time ago, to pass something that you really don't like, but come back and improve it in subsequent sessions. And that's not a bad thing.
So if I could say, one of the great things I like about Commissioner Patterson is there are a few people in Texas politics who really don't mind pissing off people on both sides, and he's one of them. So huzzah to that.
And I'm good at it.
And you are good at it.
That's why I lost my last election.
And the second thing I'm going to say is, when we're done here today, I'm going to go to Llano County to a little piece of property that I bought on the Llano River with a home equity loan. So thank you for that. But the whole point about most bills, I've only worked in 20 years on one bill that passed as it was filed. And that was, ironically, the bill I mentioned, House Bill 357 from last session, that made those kids of the dead firefighters basically eligible for free pre-K. Every other bill that I've ever worked on has changed dramatically. The reality is, I always tell people that choose to hire me, this is a 3-session play. If you want to get something done, you file it one session, you raise awareness, you work, like you're talking about with constitutional carry. You file something, it raises awareness, you normalize it in the next session, you pass it in the third. That's kind of the political order and the way things work here. And that can be really, really frustrating because you see a problem, you try to work a problem, you see an issue, you see an obvious, clear solution, and because of an internal pissing contest at the Capitol, your bill dies on the last night, and then you have to wait 2 more years to get this done. One of the things that I worked on years ago, I met a woman named Patsy Shanbaum. She came to me because her daughter Jamie was in a hyperbolic chamber at Children's Hospital in Houston because she was a freshman at UT Austin, got spinal meningitis, her daughter did, lost all of her fingers, her palms, and her legs from the knees down to meningitis. How many of you got a meningitis shot when you started college in Texas? Patchy Shambaum is why. Patchy Shambaum went to the legislature, got the law changed. That was, I think, '09. We were only able to get the law changed for the dormitories because that was what the CDC recommendation was at the time, that only kids in college living in the dorms needed to get the vaccine. In that intervening 2-year period, the CDC changed their policy and they now recommended that all college students get the vaccine. Why? Because you guys make out a lot, you share water bottles, you're just generally infectious and disgusting. Sorry, it's the truth. And the reality in all of this is that I found myself 2 years after we passed that bill in the Capitol cafeteria sitting across the table from a guy named Greg Williams. Greg's son had gotten meningitis 2 weeks previously at an apartment complex because the dorms at A&M were full. He was an Aggie. He got meningitis and he died within 24 hours. And his dad is sitting across the table from me in the Capitol cafeteria, and his dad asked me, I have goosebumps a decade later telling you guys the story. His dad asked me, why didn't you pass the bill that would have saved my son? Okay? It haunted me to this day. But to the commissioner's point, you can't always get what you want, but you can come back and fight like hell the next session to make it better. Because the first time out of the box, you're not gonna get what you want.
Yeah. So this is where those conversations come into play. Again, what you hear being put out publicly is not necessarily going to be the reason that people actually have an issue with your bill. And I'm going to go over several individual categories of reasons somebody might have a problem with your bill and force you to change it. So as you've heard, a lot of times bills get changed or modified because some stakeholder says, no, I'm going to make such a ruckus that your bill will die and you might lose your next election, which everybody always cares about, right? So what are the different types of issues? Well, sometimes it literally has nothing to do with the content of the bill. It's this rivalry or retribution within the ledge. One time, a friend of mine who's a lobbyist had a bill, and he had a great author in the House, a great author in the Senate, and everybody agreed with it. Nobody was really fighting it. But as it turned out, during that session, something came up where the chairman of the Senate committee that needed to hear this bill got really upset that the particular representative who was authoring the bill in the House was, persuading people not to vote on his bill or something there. It had to do totally with what they were doing on another bill. And that Senate committee chair completely refused to even give it a hearing. It's like, no, won't bring it up, and he has complete authority to do that, and nobody was able to put pressure on him otherwise. And so that bill never got a hearing in the Senate, and it died, not because people disagree with the policy, because people were fighting with each other about some other issue. And that's very common. I'm going to hold your bill hostage until you do something with it, do something for me that I want you to do. So sometimes it's just a matter of now, that wasn't in the news. So it's a matter of understanding, hey, what's actually happening here? What are the relationships that, oh, maybe I need a different author next time because the Senate chairman, he's fine with the bill, he just doesn't like that author. So you work the relationships there. So that's one way you might just have to change. It might not be about policy. But something else, you might realize that you thought your bill was about this one thing, but the hospitals didn't like it, and you didn't even realize how it affected them, but they come in and say, no, this is gonna affect us poorly, or the businesses, and that wasn't your intention, but a periphery result of the bill is, yeah, they don't like it. They're gonna oppose it, and the legislators don't wanna do anything to tick them off because they're getting funded, and it goes back to money sometimes. And so you realize you have to take that one part out of your bill that maybe you don't care about in order to move the bill along. So if it really doesn't change the bill much and it gets the one opposition out of the way, that's usually an easy decision. Okay, maybe take that part out, everybody's fine with it, and it moves. Sometimes, though, you have a much, much harder decision to make. And as a lobbyist or an advocate, you will be having to make some of these decisions. You'll realize that people actually have a major problem, a stakeholder, whether it's a lobbyist, an organization, government agency, or grassroots in general, maybe a grassroots-driven organization with membership, they don't like your bill or something about it. And sometimes you can talk with them and say, okay, well, if I compromise with you, if I take this section out or change it this way, water it down, only applies to this group of people, only as a recommendation instead of a mandate, things like that. Sometimes you can get them to back off and agree with it. But you have to make hard decisions sometimes and say, well, do I want to make this compromise? It kind of kills the intent of my bill, but I get something through and I can claim that victory. Or do I say, no, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to keep fighting and hope I can garner enough support. At some level, you'll realize, no, that compromise isn't worth making because it completely takes away anything I was trying to do, and it really is good as nothing. So I don't really care, that passes or nothing passes. At some level, you will get there. But other than that, you will have to make hard decisions. Do I risk not passing anything but still try to go for the stronger bill, or do I try to get something through that everybody can agree with?
Kind of on the point of it sometimes takes multiple sessions. How different is the landscape in the legislature this session compared to previous sessions? Are there things not getting through that are surprising you, or things that are going through at breakneck speed that are surprising you? And kind of what do y'all see as kind of underpinning those differences?
Yeah, so I think we started out session in a very different scenario than previous sessions have started for quite a few sessions, and that's because we had this sense of agreement and kumbaya, right, between governor and lieutenant governor and speaker, the big three in Texas, right? And they were talking about the same priorities. They were saying, yes, we're together on this. We're going to move this together. And I think you can see that as a good thing, as a positive thing, and say, yes, we all agree. We have this coalescence around the things that we agree on our priorities, and we're going to move this through. I think you can also see that as a negative thing, because if there's not enough healthy debate over what should we actually be pushing, you don't do the things that are best for the Texas people. So if all that we see is ever just kumbaya, everybody's going to get along, we're all going to agree on these things, that's actually not a healthy setup. You want debate, that you want respectful discourse and dialogue and debate and disagreement, so you can hash out instead of just saying, oh, we're all going to agree with each other and get along. However, I don't think you're seeing that agreement necessarily more. I think we're coming back into the House versus Senate, and we're seeing more of that debate start to happen. Again, it goes down to budget. What are we going to do with our budget? And y'all probably have some more specifics. But those are kind of the changes that I see, especially coming into this session, that we hadn't seen for many sessions prior.
Okay, the big three in Texas, the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and the governor. Is the lieutenant governor in Texas Republican or Democrat? Is every statewide elected official in Texas Republican or Democrat? Republican. Is the House Republican controlled or democratically controlled? Republican. Is the Senate democratically controlled or Republican controlled? Republican. The politics this session are unlike anything I've seen in the 2 decades I've been doing this. It was mentioned earlier that primaries have always been and have been traditionally for the last couple of decades the de facto general election. That is no longer the case. I believe that we are actually seeing genuine debate and discourse, more so this session than we have seen in a political generation in Texas. And here's why. The big three are terrified. The people in this building, the money structure of Texas politics is terrified. Because let's be honest, the corporate dollars have essentially written Texas law willy-nilly for a generation. What happened in this last November election is fundamentally important to understand. Texas Democrats had not picked up a single seat, not one, in a midterm election in a generation. They won 12. They won 12 in a midterm election last November. For the first time, the Texas Republican Party in the modern era is having to focus more on November than on March. And that has fundamentally changed everything about Texas politics. Texas Republicans are now looking in that rearview mirror, and they see a car that is gaining. Objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. It is a really fancy convertible driven by Donald Trump with Beto O'Rourke sitting right by him. And they look at that and they understand what is coming down the highway in 2020. And you talk to well-placed Democrats, people up in the high-placed Democrats, and they believe with enough money, they can take the House in 2020. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I do believe that a lot of Republicans this session are acting like it very well could.
Yeah, I would like to second that. But 2011, I think it was, we had 101 Republican state reps. Mm-hmm. This year it's 80.
We're at what,
83?
84. They picked up 12. I forget with all the special
we're
elections.
Very close to having a competitive breakup or makeup or possibly a Democrat House, not so much in the Senate. And in my view, it will be driven by the nominees on the two parties in a presidential nominee. We have those of you who are Democrats, you have the best opportunity you've had in a long time. However, it looks like the nominee contenders on the Democrat side for president are not going to help you. I mean, the possibility exists that you're going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, running against a guy, Donald Trump, who Republicans don't like. I think he's a buffoon who's done a couple of good things, but it's not worth the buffoonery. But and so it's a laydown. It could very well be a laydown for Democrats in 2020. But I don't know that they're going to get there. The best thing Republicans have going for them now are Democrats, and that's something you have to contend with if you're a member of that party. I'm ostensibly a member of the Republican Party, but wish there was someplace else to go.
Can I say one thing? I give the Tribune a lot of credit. Every about 6 months, the Tribune asks, they do polling with the Texas Politics Project, Jim Henson at UT, and it's fascinating stuff because every year, every 6 months, they ask the same question. What is the most important issue you believe facing Texas? If you ask that, when I ask that question of Republicans, typically between 55 and 62, I think, % of Republicans will say the single most important issue to them is either immigration or border security. Those two things. That's why there's the obsession with the wall, right? There's that one issue of the other, or however one you think of it, whatever it is that's driving that focus on that immigration border security piece. 60+% of Republican voters say that's the thing that motivates them. They poll about 10 different issues. All of the different 10 issues added together don't equal 60% for the Democrats. So the thing that the Republicans, the opportunity that the Democrats have is there, I believe, but the benefit that the Republicans have is the focus of their electorate. And it's very focused on immigration, and it's very focused on border security. And make into that what you will, but understand that's politically why we're seeing a lot of the things that we're seeing.
Awesome. Well, I'm guessing a bunch of y'all have questions. So if you want to just go ahead and line up at the mic, and we'll just take them one by one.
I'm not tall enough
That
for
is
this.
really tall.
So I wanted to ask a general question about like how, if you can summarize how you lobby a politician. I interned for my state senator last special session, and I worked also in college with this lobby group. And while I was on the Senate floor working during the special session, I like waved to the lobby group that I knew, and the staffer said, "Who are you waving at?" And I said, "Oh, there's such and such lobby group," and they were like, "Oh, I'd never heard of them before. What do they do?" And I thought that lobby groups would talk to everybody, especially if they're on opposite sides. But apparently, that's not how that works. I don't know how you lobby, if lobby groups do it differently, and so just generally, if you can elaborate on that.
Yes, lobby groups do it differently. It's going to depend on your issue. So if you have an issue, like it's a small bill, you have a champion legislator who really cares about it, or has what it takes to get it through, it might be more of a matter of get somebody to file it. He says, "I'll work it. I've got the people. I run the committee. Well, I'll just get it through." You don't have to make a huge fuss about it. You don't necessarily want to go and say, "I want to have a 30-minute meeting with every single legislator." You don't need to do that. Sometimes you will want to raise public awareness about it, especially if there are myths going around and everybody has a false conception of it. So it really depends on the issue you are working with. I definitely try to put the information out there. A lot of the issues I'm working on, that I work on, everybody's going to hear about them some way or another, so I want them to hear about them from me. And also, just because one staffer for an office hasn't heard of a group, maybe they're working scheduling, maybe they're working a different part of public policy. A lot, especially the Senate offices, because they're larger, they have more staffers. They'll cover, somebody for criminal justice, somebody for education, somebody for different issues. Some legislators will care more about one issue. They're more focused on education. They really couldn't care less about this other thing. So it kind of depends on the office. Just the fact that they haven't heard of them or don't remember them doesn't mean they haven't been visited, because they get visits. I mean, you sit in a legislator's office for 30 minutes, you're going to see, I don't know how many people come in and give a handout. Yeah. But generally, you will want to make sure you know who, especially visiting with the committee members, because they're the ones of those usually 9 people. You got to have those 5 votes to get it out of committee. You got to have the committee chairman to bring it up for a hearing and bring it up for a vote, or your bill doesn't move anywhere, no matter how many commitments you have to vote for on the floor. So you focus on those first, and then if it's a major issue everybody's going to hear about and maybe have some issues with, you definitely need to be getting your message out.
I think you have more experience in this.
My suggestion, I think that's basically the question, is how do you lobby? What's the advantage? What are the components of a good lobbyist? And the first one is never tell a lie. If you can't tell the truth, just shut up. I mean, and because your reputation will be tainted forever. And as a matter of fact, I think it's probably a pretty good thing for life in general. If you never tell a lie, you don't have to remember what you said last week. You know, that's just a deal.
So true.
But don't BS anybody. You can't BS the champion BSers in the world, and that's the folks over there in the dump stadium.
How do you follow that up? One thing I would say is this, you know, I've learned, look, I think you guys kind of have probably picked up on my general vibe and political attitude. I realized a long time ago that I could like pretend to be something that I'm not and be completely disingenuous with people, or I could be the orange striped zebra who kind of does things differently, and you know, and I've been successful at it, not because I make big campaign contributions. I don't. I'm very credible with people. I don't lie. If I'm gonna kill your bill, I'm gonna make a flyer and I'm gonna take it to your office the day before I testify against it and say, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna kill your bill. I'm gonna do everything I can to kill your bill. Here's exactly what I'm gonna say, so I'm not gonna surprise you. And you know, even if I had a situation and that exact same thing happened, we did kill the bill, and I went back to that same office where my bill got referred, and that guy was the chairman, and he said, you know, Jerry Madden, he said, you know, you were so honest and upfront with me about this. Not only am I gonna support your bill, I'm gonna sponsor it because you didn't lie, because you were credible, because you were stand up. And that's what people respond to. They respond as much to I'm cynically saying that money is the lubricant of American politics, because it is. The only thing that can absolutely outburn money in the Texas legislature is passion. Passion, passion, passion. I was in a hearing the other day on a bill I'm working on this session that would raise the age to work in a strip club from 18 to 21. And I met a woman who brought the Senate to a grinding halt when she told the story of, no. She brought the Senate to a grinding halt when she told the story of her 18-year-old daughter who was overserved alcohol at the strip club where she was working to, quote, loosen her up before they put her in her car and she drove and killed herself. That happened last summer. And now that mom is pushing this bill, which will pass, I guarantee you. Not because, and the Texas Entertainment Association, the AKA the strip club lobby, opposed it. So sometimes money doesn't win if there's passion involved.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, no, that still didn't work. So I just had a quick question. I heard a lot about the public versus private lobby, I guess, or whatnot, about these bills. But for me, a lot of these bills, the policies mean life or death. So I just wanted to ask a quick question on how do we erase the pettiness of the like versus dislikes of people and groups to support like the improvement of life?
How do you find the middle, is what you're saying. And I think that the commissioner, if I'm hearing a commissioner, is how do you find the place in the middle where we're not so polarized to the like and dislike?
Not so much the middle, because I'm okay with, you know, the controversy, but I guess
Right.
what I'm asking is how do you stop getting lobbyists that are, like, I believe you said it, sometimes they'll shut down bills because they're like, oh, I don't
How do you
like
get a
this.
bill discussed on its merits instead of on the petty middle school girl
I see what you're
drama?
saying.
Exactly, because like for the
fair.
AR-15, like for gun laws, like with AR-15s, as a person of color, as a black woman, I'm the third most likely to get shot, right behind indigenous men and trans women. So AR-15s, guns scare the crap out of me, and I'm from the country, so I've seen guns totally, you know? So I'm asking, how do we stop looking at it as, oh, they're just being sensitive, or oh, they want to take our guns away, to, okay, handguns are fine, wear your license somewhere or whatever, this is cool, but don't walk around with an AR-15, because that does cause harm, that causes alarm, that causes fear. You see what I'm saying? Like those kind of simple things that in my mind I think are very basic, but for some reason to legislators and lobbyists it's not. Does that make sense?
Well, I would say that much of the alarm caused is based upon misinformation. The mantra that an AR-15 is a weapon of war designed solely to be used by military organizations is just not true. The most offensive thing about an AR-15 to the uninitiated is it looks really mean and macho. But if I wouldn't hunt a deer, I wouldn't hunt deer with an AR-15. The round is too small. It wouldn't bring down a deer. And most people don't know the difference between an AR-15 is that AR-15 shoots one bullet per one trigger pull. You know, Selena knows. Selena and I had dinner last night, by the way. And a military weapon, it's got a capability of firing fully automatic. But some of what people do that are advocates on both sides is to grab attention, and I think many of the folks in the open carry that carry macho, nasty-looking weapons do so to grab attention, and I frankly think it's not always helpful. You know, to say the least. You know, we've had for many, many years the ability to carry a long gun openly without a license anywhere you want. You can walk down Congress with an AR-15, or for that matter, with a fully automatic weapon, if you can own one, which is very, very, very difficult in Texas to own one. I own a machine gun. Actually, I'm on more than one, and I use their investments because there's a limited number in circulation. If it wasn't in circulation in 1986 in private hands, you can make no more of them. So it's actually a market. But you can walk down, if you can lawfully own it, a machine gun down Congress. But why would you do that?
And that's what I'm saying. I think
Yeah.
that definitely has the intent to alarm. That's the intent to.
Yeah, I think walking around with a long gun is alarming. I don't think walking around with an openly carried handgun is alarming.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so that's just, it's people who are so zealous and so focused on one single issue that they sometimes don't know that they're hurting what they what they're seeking, hurting the potential for success. Rachel may disagree with me. You know, she's in the milieu every day. She's in the fight, but I think we've reached the point where maybe some of the gun advocacy is counterproductive for the gun rights cause.
So I actually am going to disagree somewhat. I'll get there in a second. I completely agree with you. I really wish we could sit down and have everything discussed on its merits. There was none of the money, none of the, oh, I'm worried about my next election. We hired you at the ballot box to go do a job. Let's sit down, actually talk about every single policy on its merits. Are you upholding your oath of office? Are you doing what you were sent there to do? Are you thinking about how this affects your constituents? Are you thinking about the right thing for Texas? And instead, almost every single bit of policy that has any kind of debate over it, even if that's what's being discussed publicly, that's not really why it passes or doesn't. It's all because of the political pressure. Money, why do they care about money? Because they care about getting elected. So that's why the thing that can overcome money is the passion, because sometimes no matter how many donations you have, if you get public opinion against you because of the passion, then you're not going to win anyway. That's why they care about the money. So I'm absolutely with you. I wish we could sit down, have all the conversation on the ledge be about what is best, what are the facts of the matter, what's our data, let's talk about the merits and quit this pettiness and the middle school girl drama that is the ledge a lot of times. The thing where I would disagree is, unfortunately, that wasn't happening. That was not happening in the gun debate. It was this emotionally charged thing happening. I actually do believe that the open carry marches, which I was actually a part of, down on 6th Street with my AR-15, in a very peaceful, non-threatening manner, in a very legal manner, on a sling. There are memes of me. I don't usually walk down 6th Street. When I do, I have my AR-15. Somebody did that, and that was kind of cool. But I think what it did is it said, okay, you want this to be about political pressure. We're going to do this to get the attention of the media. And the point was, okay, we have the ability now to carry with an AR-15. We'd really rather, like you said, it'd be a whole lot easier, carry a handgun, let it be mostly concealed, but if it happens to show, we don't go to jail. That was really the whole goal. And they weren't listening the previous 2 sessions when we tried to do that peacefully and just talking about the merits of it. And so we had to do a peaceful demonstration to say, okay, we actually mean this, and if you're going to make this all, like, we can't just talk about on the merits, okay, we'll have a demonstration so you can't ignore it. And that's actually why the bill was passed the next session after that happened. And then after they passed, we said, okay, now you're giving us the ability to actually carry with a handgun, which is what we wanted all along, so we don't have to have this, dramatic walks, peaceful walks with the gun. So that's kind of where that went. We would have really much rather just have the discussion on the merits. Just listen to us on the merits. and center the discussion around that.
I wish, as a state, that we would spend 1/10 of the time talking about our children's mental health needs as we do about guns. If we're going to solve school shootings, if we're going to deal with the situations that we have in all of our communities, we will not do it by weaponizing our children. We will not do it by arming our schools. We will do it by actually addressing the underpinning currents in our society that are causing children to have these kinds of outbursts. Period. End of story. We cannot gun our way out of this.
Yes, sir.
So I wanted to give some background to my question. So I'm from South Texas. I'm from the Valley. And one of the biggest issues there were that families were being separated from their children due to the immigration status of their parents. So to give some background, George P. Bush earlier talked about how children who have family issues, even though they have high IQs, they have problems in terms of their grades. So my question is what political actions can be done to help families whose children are born in the United States and their parents are not legal citizens, so they are separated from their children. So what political actions can be done to, help with those issues? Because I know from a migrant background, I don't know how I would have been able to be where I am now without, having my parents to help me with that. They worked in the fields. They came as illegal, undocumented immigrants, but through the amnesty Ronald Reagan, they were allowed to be here in the U.S. So what political action can be done to help these families who, are separated due to that immigration problems?
If I could, I'll start. First, it's an incredibly important question. I think that we all need to realize that this is not a humanitarian crisis as much as it is a politically conscious choice being made to treat children and families as they're being treated. My family showed up. Anybody know what a honky is? Where the word honky comes from? It's a Hungarian. That's what the Italians used to call my grandfather when he showed up and they got off the boat, which is in my mind the exact same thing as having to flee oppression and violence and fear, which is exactly what they were doing when they happened to come from a different place with different colored skin. First off, what I think we need to acknowledge is there's only so much the state as a state can do. But specifically, I would urge all of you to be pushing your legislators, your state elected officials, to make sure that if children are being held in essentially internment camps in Texas, that those facilities be regulated and monitored by the state to ensure at the very basic that they are in alignment with state child care licensing policies. State law says that emergency shelters are exempt, believe it or not. So which is why state facilities, many of those facilities in Texas are not being monitored. There is not a lot of attention, AKA any attention, being paid to this issue at the legislature this session. This is regarded immigration as a federal policy, a federal problem. It doesn't matter if your part of the state has these detention camps that are growing. It doesn't matter that we're detaining children, we're fencing families under overpasses in El Paso. That's the federal government's problem, not ours. So ultimately, I would urge you to demand more of your state elected officials, to demand more of our federally elected officials. And on that same point, there is no more important moment for the next decade for children in this state, particularly children of color, than what's about to happen with the United States Census. The people in this room, if you care about vulnerable populations, there's nothing more important that you can do than push for an accurate census count. For political reasons, there is downward pressure being placed on an accurate census count in Texas, which is foolhardy for many reasons. However, the people most likely to be missed and undercounted, in this case potentially somewhat intentionally, are low-income kids of color. Do everything you can to make sure an accurate count happens.
So I think so first of all, I don't address this issue of public policy, so I don't have specific policy proposals, but from a broader perspective, I do. And I think you take away the focus, you make it easier for people who need to be here, who need to escape oppression, who want to work hard for a better life, you make it easier for them to do so legally. Those people are now so motivated to get out of horrible living conditions and despite the political corruption and the things that we don't like about Texas and our government, you know what? We have an amazing place to live. We have an absolutely amazing place to live. And if we could make it easier for them to legally come here and have protection from that and work hard for a better life, as most of them want to do, I think that is one approach that can help solve that problem. I think another possible way of looking at the messaging is expand it. There are so many criminal justice issues that also separate children and parents needlessly. There are so many reasons that people, especially minorities, people of color, are being jailed for non-jailable offenses, in the criminal justice world, for things that are non-violent crimes, and that also separates parents from children. And I think there is a way those issues can be messaged and talked about in a very compassionate way that says, a lot of the issues we're seeing of acting out and then being prone to violence are from children who don't grow up with a wholesome family background, and some of it has to do with this separation, the needless separation. So I think that is something that should be talked about with compassion. Let's stop penalizing people who want to do no harm, again, right? Penalizing people who want to come here, bring their families here for a better life and work hard for a better life. Let's make it easier for them to do so legally. So that's my general answer, if that helps.
Okay, that is our time, unfortunately. I know you had one more question, I'm sorry. I just want to thank y'all very much for coming. This was a great discussion, and we really appreciate y'all being here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.